Albert Speer, the Nazi who admitted guilt. He was the only top Nazi to confess responsibility at Nuremberg. The sole figure who stood and declared, "Yes, I was accountable." He completed his full 20-year prison sentence. He authored best-selling memoirs, detailing how a civilized man could serve a barbaric regime. Historians labeled him the good Nazi, if such a concept could exist. Yet, his own daughter uncovered something history books overlooked. The man who publicly repented for crimes against humanity couldn't embrace his children. His remorse was purely intellectual and rehearsed. It was a performance, and those closest to him saw through it completely. This is what Speer's family revealed about the man behind the confession, and what his daughter did that might be more significant than anything her father ever stated. The compromise that cost him absolutely everything. Before Albert Speer became a defendant at Nuremberg, he held a far more dangerous role. He was indispensable, Hitler's personal architect, the man who designed the monumental structures intended to endure for 1,000 years. Later, as the Minister of Armaments, he sustained the German war effort long after it should have faltered. Speer was the sophisticated Nazi, the one who could converse about classical music and Renaissance art while overseeing factories powered by enslaved labor. His intellect made him valuable. His ambition made him blind. But here's what most people fail to realize. His family bore the consequences of that ambition long before he faced imprisonment. Speer was so engrossed in Hitler's inner circle that his wife Margarethe once quipped she'd have to call him, announcing that Mrs. Speer wished to speak with Mr. Speer. It wasn't truly a joke. It was the truth veiled to lessen the pain. Between 1934 and 1942, they had 6 children, and Speer was absent for nearly all of it. Not physically deployed elsewhere, but emotionally inaccessible. Present in the house, yet absent in every significant way. His children grew up with a spectral father. They just didn't grasp it yet. The sheltered world that was about to shatter. The Speer children resided in one of the most peculiar environments in Nazi Germany. Hitler's exclusive zone at the Berghof, high in the Bavarian Alps, while bombs rained down on German cities and millions perished across Europe. These children watched American cartoons with Eva Braun. They played in mountain meadows, completely unaware of their father's actual deeds. If you're captivated by how Nazi families navigated their impossible inheritances, subscribe. We explore these narratives weekly on History of the World. This privilege carried a price they hadn't yet comprehended. The Speers weren't merely a wealthy family enjoying the mountains. They were living within a meticulously crafted deception, one utterly dependent on the Reich's survival, and in the spring of 1945, that illusion completely dissolved. Germany surrendered. Hildesberg was 9 years old. Her youngest sibling, Ernst, was barely 2. They anticipated their father's return home. Now that the war concluded, instead he was apprehended, put on trial at Nuremberg, and sentenced to 20 years in Spandau prison. 20 years. Hilda would be nearing 30 before her father was released. Ernst would barely recall him. But Speer's imprisonment fostered something unexpected. A relationship built entirely on paper. And through those letters, his daughter would ultimately provoke a confrontation he never foresaw. The correspondence that revealed everything. During his 2 decades in Spandau, Albert Speer dispatched hundreds of letters to his children. It was his sole connection to them, his only means of being a father from behind prison walls. Hilda, in particular, maintained consistent communication. She wrote about school, about friends, about the minor details of growing up in post-war Germany. But in 1953, when Hilda was 17, she undertook a remarkable act. She wrote to her imprisoned father, requesting he explain his guilt. Not to offer her comfort, nor to assure her that everything would be fine, she sought his accountability for his actions. To elucidate how a father, her father, could have been involved in such profound evil. This wasn't a child seeking reassurance. It was a confrontation, and Speer's reply exposed everything. He responded naturally. He always responded. His letters were eloquent, considered, meticulously crafted arguments about accountability and moral failings. He could articulate his guilt through perfectly logical paragraphs. He could analyze his own complicity with the detachment of a historian examining another's life. Yet, something was absent. His words lacked emotional intensity, any genuine anguish. Reading his letters felt like perusing a legal document concerning his own spirit. Technically accurate, emotionally hollow. He could articulate responsibility without truly feeling it. Hilda preserved those letters. She continued writing to him, but somewhere within that exchange, she began to grasp something disquieting about her father. His repentance wasn't a transformation. It was a performance. He had learned to articulate the correct sentiments because saying the right things sustained him. First at Nuremberg, where admitting guilt might have spared him the gallows, and subsequently in the public consciousness. The question remained, what would transpire when he finally returned home? The reunion that faltered. October 1st, 1966. After completing his full 20-year sentence, Albert Speer emerged from Spandau prison. Cameras flashed. Reporters hurled inquiries. The world eagerly awaited the Nazi, who apologized to finally embrace his freedom. His children were waiting for him. They were adults by then, the eldest in their 30s, the youngest barely recalling a time before his imprisonment. This should have signified a moment of reconciliation. The father's return, the family's reunification, the lengthy separation's end. However, that is not what occurred. The reunion was a complete failure. Speer discovered something devastating. He was unable to connect with his own children. Not on an emotional level. Not in any meaningful way. The letters had fostered an illusion of a relationship. But when face to face, there was nothing substantial. His own recorded words, from a later time, are haunting. I cannot connect emotionally with my children. His son Ernst, who was 2 years old when Speer went to prison, remained silent during visits, simply sitting there quietly. And Speer acknowledged the stark reality. I too had nothing to say, and it's sad. I still think about that. The man who authored best-selling memoirs on Nazi guilt, the man who gave interviews explaining the psychology of evil, the man who could fill hundreds of pages analyzing his own moral failures. That individual couldn't engage in a genuine conversation with his own son. The barriers he'd erected around himself weren't solely for public perception. They extended all the way inward. The coldest household in Germany. In 1978, journalist Gitta Sarini visited the Speer residence to interview him for a biography. What she encountered disturbed her as profoundly as anything related to his Nazi past. She described an intense atmosphere of loneliness pervading the household. 5 of the 6 Speer children had relocated across Germany, visiting infrequently. The family home felt like a mausoleum, beautiful, cold, devoid of genuine life. Yet, the most revealing detail emerged during a family dinner. Sarini observed the grown children arriving. They offered formal handshakes, no warm embraces. Their conversation was polite and distant as Speer occupied the head of the table. The overall atmosphere felt incredibly stifling. Then Speer exited the room, and suddenly Sarini detected something absent all evening. Giggles erupted. The children noticeably relaxed. They started teasing each other. They became animated, open, and truly alive. Speer's wife, Margaret, brightened, appearing youthful and cheerful in a way that seemed impossible just moments prior. The family dynamic improved significantly without him present. Speer himself perceived this change. He once asked Sarini, sounding genuinely puzzled, "Do you notice how she brightens when they visit? How her demeanor shifts when I'm not here?" He recognized the situation and could even describe it. However, he couldn't alter it. The emotional barriers seemed to be permanently established. Whatever capacity he once possessed for authentic human connection he had previously surrendered it. First seeking Hitler's favor, then for self-preservation, and subsequently for the meticulously crafted persona of a remorseful Nazi. By the time he desired it back, it had vanished. The unresolved query. One of his daughters refused to let the narrative conclude there. Hilda had spent many years watching her father feign penitence without genuine feeling. As a young woman, she sent him letters demanding accountability. She had witnessed the unsuccessful attempts at reconciliation, the awkward dinners, and the persistent solitude that seemed to accompany him constantly. Yet, she still held one significant question, a question that troubled her more than any other. How could such a sensitive, fundamentally kind individual like my father, who possessed wit and humor, and in my personal experience was not overly dictatorial, how could a person like that become involved with this regime? She posed this question directly to him. She inquired in written correspondence. She raised it during their discussions, and a truly satisfying explanation never emerged. Speer could effectively detail the workings of Nazi Germany. He could analyze the psychology underlying obedience, the allure of wielding power, the process by which decent individuals rationalize that dreadful actions are unavoidable. He could provide explanations for everything, provided he was discussing someone else. But he was incapable of explaining his own actions. Not truly. Not in a manner that reached the essential human level where genuine comprehension resides. Consequently, Hilda resolved to formulate her own answer. Not through spoken words, but through concrete actions. The inheritance she chose not to keep. Upon Albert Speer's passing in 1981, Hilda received a troubling inheritance. Artwork she suspected originated from Jewish individuals who had been murdered. Paintings plundered during the very criminal acts her father claimed ignorance of. She had the option to retain them. Many offspring of Nazi officials did precisely that. They displayed the art within their residences, convincing themselves it was merely family property now, allowing the passage of time to obscure its origins. She could have discreetly sold the pieces, pocketed the proceeds, and moved forward. Nobody would have judged her. In fact, no one would have even known. However, Hilda took an extraordinary step. She proceeded to sell the paintings, and dedicated every single cent to establishing Zurich Geben. This name signifies "give back" in the German language. It functions as a foundation dedicated to supporting female Jewish artists. The daughter of Hitler's architect dedicated the remainder of her life to financially aiding the very community impacted by her father's work. Her contributions didn't cease there. In the year 2004, she was honored with the Moses Mendelssohn Award for her commendable efforts in fostering Jewish-German reconciliation. In 2015, at the age of 79, she opened her home in Berlin to welcome Syrian refugees. Individuals fleeing a conflict zone found sanctuary with the daughter of a man who once designed structures for history's most destructive regime. The judgment her daughter delivered to the world was that he was a perpetrator of atrocities. Hilda Schramm, who adopted her husband's surname, thereby distancing herself from Speer, never publicly pardoned her father. She refrained from publishing memoirs in his defense. She did not contend that he was secretly a good person who committed grave errors. She simply progressed beyond him, and that might represent the most damning indictment of all. Albert Speer dedicated his later decades to attempting to control his historical narrative. He authored books to explain his perspective. He granted interviews to shape how history would perceive him. He labored persistently to be recognized as the Nazi who grasped his culpability, who accepted accountability, who demonstrated that even those involved in immense wrongdoing could achieve atonement. Yet, his own daughter, the individual who knew him the longest, who penned those letters, who observed his inability to connect with his own family. She was not convinced. She did not engage him in debate. She did not attempt to expose him. She simply and quietly established something that held more significance than his feigned regret ever could. While Speer wrote about culpability, Hilda took concrete action. While he elaborated on his shortcomings in widely selling books, she transformed inherited disgrace into positive contributions. The Nazi who apologized left behind personal accounts and interviews along with carefully constructed justifications. His daughter, however, left a foundation. Refugees were welcomed into her residence. A lifetime of dedicated effort that genuinely aided the people targeted for destruction by her father's regime. Historical accounts might portray Albert Speer as the penitent Nazi, but Hilda Schramm exemplified what genuine accountability truly entails. Not mere pronouncements about guilt, but a life dedicated to rectifying wrongs. Not rationalizing wickedness, but actively opposing its lasting consequences. The daughter did not offer forgiveness, nor did she rehabilitate his reputation. She simply achieved a greater historical impact than his performed contrition ever did. And that fact reveals more about Albert Speer than any writings he produced about himself. Thank you for tuning into History of the World. If you found this video informative, explore our other in-depth features on the families of Nazi leaders and the post-war period. Please like this video, subscribe, and activate the notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming content. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and activating notifications so you're alerted for our upcoming content.